Please welcome Michał Wąsicki. He's a Ruby developer, and he will talk about showing progress of background jobs with Turbo. Please give him a round of applause.
Hello. Before I tell you about the topic of my presentation, I will quickly introduce myself. My name is Michał Wąsicki. If you like challenges, you can try to pronounce my last name, but you don't have to. I'm a Ruby developer at Visuality. Before we start, I like to ask you a few questions. I know that yesterday I already made a little research. What is the state of you and what you think about Turbo Hotwire? But I have another question. How many people completed the tutorial, this Hot Rails Turbo Hotwire tutorial? Please raise your hand. Okay, few of you. And how many of you want to use Hotwire on production? Want? Okay. Lots of you want to do that. That's great. Maybe after my talk, I will motivate you to try either the Hotwire tutorial or to start using Hotwire on production. We will see. And the topic of my presentation is how to display progress of something that is happening on the backend with Hotwire. I thought that this topic is nice because it shows a use case that might be that you may need at some point in the development, because sooner or later you will have some background job, and sooner or later you will have a background job that takes more than a few seconds. And it's nice to inform users what is the state of this job and when it will be finished. In such case, we can easily use Hotwire. But let's get back to history, to 1985, and how it was done at that year. So before, if you want to achieve that, you have background job and you want to display a progress bar, for example, you need to add one more Ruby gem. And there is a great Ruby gem, Sidekick Status. Probably there are more that can achieve that, but this is, to me, it's more popular. And it provides a very convenient API that you could use. But, as we know from yesterday, it's against the laziness. We are adding one more Ruby gem to our gem file. And also, it provides the API that might be confusing a little. If you are a new developer or if you are new in the project, you need to go through this documentation of this gem to read what those methods are doing. Total, add, it sounds like a magic. Also, it's getting more complex if the job becomes more complex, and if it invokes more than one service, few services, then you need to pass these magic methods inside those services, etc., etc. So there are many challenges with this approach. It's easy at the first glance, but it has many drawbacks. Now it works. Okay, but we live in a modern era of Hotwire, at least those of us who are using it on production. So we can achieve the same with Hotwire. And in my presentation, I won't tell you about the theory about how Hotwire exactly works, because you all heard about it. And you know that Hotwire consists of Turbo, Stimulus, and Strada. In my presentation, you will see a little of Turbo and a little of Stimulus. But the piece of theory that we need for the purpose of this presentation is the fact of broadcasting updates happening on the backend to the front end. We could do that before Hotwire with Action Cable, but now we have a really convenient API that is doing that easily. And what Rails provides to us is a really convenient API that we can hook to changes happening on the database level. So when something changes in the database, we can easily broadcast a message to the front end that, hey, something was updated. Example time. For the purpose of this presentation, we will use a very simple application that I created, and it consists of two models. One of them is a joke, and another one is a joke request. So imagine you are a user that wants to have some fun, and you create a joke request. In there, you specify how many jokes you want to fetch from the API that provides jokes. We will use Chuck Norris API, because it's free and it has really nice endpoint to provide a random joke about Chuck Norris. So the idea is that we create a joke request, and when you hit the button submit and you specify how many jokes you want to get, you hit the endpoint, and in the endpoint we spawn a background job, and the background job downloads the jokes. And we want to display the progress of this process. Also, I need to mention that I put some jokes that I get from this API into my slides. Some of them might be inappropriate, maybe, but that's not my fault, that's this API. So this is the plan for my presentation, actually. I will show you different ways how we can achieve that. Maybe some alternatives, a little bit of JavaScript, and also I have a bonus at the very end. So let's go with the first solution. It's that simple. With Hotwire, we can use callbacks that can invoke methods which will broadcast the updates to the front end. And for example, we have a method broadcast replace to that says, hey, write to open that to the stream that is open with the specific ID and target a specified HTML element on the page and replace it with a new element with updated state. In the invocation of this method, probably the first argument is the most important because it specifies the exact stream we are writing to. And usually the biggest challenge is how to identify those streams. Because when I create a joke request and you create one, we want to broadcast the updates to the correct stream. But in our application, we are in a good position because when you want to fetch jokes, you create a record in the database. So this jokes request record in the database can serve the purpose of identification of the stream. The target is the ID HTML element on the page, and then we can provide a partial that will replace that element. And as you can guess, for the progress bar, it means just render the updated progress bar. Before we fetched, for example, just one joke, after we fetch the other one, we just have a progress bar that is one step later. So we did it on the active record level, let's say. To make it fully work, we also need to update the front end. We modify the HTML file. We need to open the stream, and you can see that the name of the stream is exactly the same as it was in the previous slide. So we identify that by joke request and the name jokes progress bar, and that's exactly the same here. And we render, of course, the partial with jokes progress bar. And it works. It's really that simple, and it works. The solution is easy, it's fast, but it also has some drawbacks. And maybe one of them is that we were using a callback. We don't like callbacks much, and it can easily escalate into so-called callbacks hell, especially in legacy applications. So maybe there is alternative approach that could be better. Also, what we did, we bind the logic responsible for updating something on the front end with the active record level. So even if you create a record in the database or somewhere else, this broadcast is being invoked. That's not so nice. And the most important, you cannot always use this solution. Imagine that we are supposed to fetch jokes, but we don't save them into database. In such case, we don't have a callback that we can hook on the active record model. So let's search for the alternatives. The second solution, which is a little better, does almost exactly the same, but we invoke the broadcast from the level of the service or the job that is doing those actions. So we are not doing that in the active record model, we are doing that in the service, for example. And we can use exactly the same method. We need to just specify on what class it's invoked. It's TurboStreams channel, but all other arguments are almost the same. Since we are independent from the active record, we also need to update the partial a little to provide the input it needs. Now it receives not the active record model, now it receives the number of the actual progress and the end stage of the progress. And modification for the front end, we actually just modify the state of the partial, the input of the partial. The stream stays the same. And it works. So we have no callbacks. This solution is easy to test because we just have one specific place that makes a broadcast. It's easy to identify. And this is a huge advantage, especially on the production. When you just not have one broadcast, but 10 places or 100 places, it's really convenient to easily find the places that are actually doing those broadcasts. It will be more convenient to debug any problems if you have them. But it looks to be not the default way. I asked you about this Hot Rails tutorial, and as I remember, there is the default way of adding broadcasts in this tutorial is using the active record approach. So maybe it's not the most typical approach there. And also, we still need to identify those streams. We are in a really good position that we still have this jokes request object in the database, and we are using it for identification. But if the requirements are changed a little and we say that, hey, don't touch anything in the database, please provide me an endpoint that fetches the specific number of jokes, then identifying this stream correctly will be much more challenging. Most probably we will need to create some ID or UID on the fly and pass it through all the methods to have it in the background worker and also have it on the front end. Maybe store it in the URL. So that was the second solution. We have also the third solution, which is actually not a background worker. You can have a different approach that will work for the requirement that I just mentioned. If you don't want to touch database at all, you could use, and if you are able to get rid of the background jobs, you can use a TurboFrame tag, and you can say that, hey, when you are on this page, go add a source attribute to the TurboFrame tag, and when the user enters this page, the Turbo automatically hits the endpoint behind this source. And the endpoint can just fetch jokes. That would also work. It would be even, if you want, you can do it even asynchronously, and you can add additional attribute, lazy loading, which will make the Turbo make this hit to the endpoint only at the moment when user enters this specific place at the page. So if it's on the bottom of the page, user will need to scroll down to actually see those results. In this last scenario, there is no background processing. there is no database, and well, to be honest, it's a completely different solution. So it depends on your requirements if you need this solution with background jobs or this alternative approach. Okay, now probably you are wondering, what if we have more than just one job? So we were talking about background jobs, and it's easy to imagine that they escalate quickly. If you want to fetch 100 jokes, maybe it will be a nice feature to make it parallel. Maybe, let's say, one job will download 25 jokes. So for the bigger number, we will just spawn more jobs. But the problem is that those jobs are running at the same time, and they will try to update the progress bar at the same time. So there will be stuttering, and most probably progress bar won't finish at 100%. How to solve this issue? If we get one step back and we look at the previous solutions, we had a very simple design. We had the state of the front end, and when something happened on the back end decided that, well, let's update the front end. And the method broadcast replace to was doing this update. The backend was responsible for that. To make it work with more background jobs, we need to shift our thinking, and we need to give more power to front end, to JavaScript. So the solution in this case is to use a mediator, stimulus controller, that will take care of those updates. And the stimulus controller will decide if you need to update the progress bar or not, and how to update it. So basically, background jobs are telling that, hey, there is an update, but the stimulus controller will make sure that this update of progress bar is smooth. Lots of code. I'm not sure if you want me to explain everything what is happening if you want to use stimulus. Maybe now I will ask you a question. Who has ever used stimulus? Okay, so like more than half of the room is already familiar with that. So you know what this magic does. You need to provide a data controller. You can provide some values as the input for the controller. You can have a target that will be used for targeting HTML elements. So the key point is that you need to modify the current HTML structure and use the convention provided by Stimulus to provide the needed data by Stimulus. And now I will show you some JavaScript. Not sure if you saw this sticker. It's from the men's bathroom. but that's how I feel when I need to write some JavaScript. So adding stimulus means we create a new stimulus controller. And stimulus controller is a JavaScript code that will be invoked on a specific pages. We know on which pages because we provided the data controller attribute. And we are using those attributes that we specified in HTML, values and targets, for a definition for the controller. But what is the most important is the connect function. This is the function that is invoked when the page is loaded and the JavaScript from the controller that is used on this page is invoked. So what our connect function needs to do? We will use quite a smart trick here, and we will override the existing turbo action. There is before stream render event, which we can override. We are basically telling, hey, when you want to add a new joke, don't do it. And there is a if condition that if you want to add this exactly joke element to the specific target, then let's run some custom code. And the custom code, you will see in a moment, is responsible for updating the progress bar. But then we can fall back to the default, which is just rendering a new element on the page, the joke. And what happens in our custom function? We increment the state of the progress bar. We have the internal value that represents the actual state of a progress bar. We update the HTML element, and we can update also other elements. We can have also the count of the jokes. And it should work. Here I don't have pros and cons. I just have a feeling and this thought that when you need to do something more complex on the front end, you usually don't have a choice. You need to give more power to JavaScript. In our case, to Stimulus. But maybe something that is worth to mention here, when you see that this moment comes, it's better to do it quickly. Like when you see that the backend is not enough to handle this complicated logic, it's better to, well, say the truth and use this JavaScript and Stimulus. I have also a bonus because I have a few more minutes. When I was preparing this test application, I thought, well, is it possible also to make it work with pagination? Is it possible that we have this updating from the background, but we also render the pagination and we switch to new pages when we need to, right? Because we don't want to render 100 jokes on one page. And of course, it is possible. The most challenging part is to figure out when we need to switch to the new page. And it's easy. If we have 10 jokes on one page, on the 11th joke, we need to clear the existing page, we need to add new joke, and we need to re-render the pagination element. If not, we just add a new joke. And in Turbo, or in my solution, clearing the page means let's render the grid that consists of the jokes, but it's empty. And the most complex thing here, most probably, is re-rendering the pagination, but it's also not so complex, because this is what we see usually in the controller, in our daily endpoints that display many records, right? So that's the same pagination, it's just updated, and we can render that if we have a partial for that. Oh, let's sum up. So yesterday we heard that Rails is magic, and to me, the Hotwire is really significant part of this magic. And in my presentation, to be honest, I didn't want you to just give you a solution how to solve exactly this problem of the progress bar with Hotwire. I wanted to give you a taste of using a Hotwire. And you can see that if you want to use Hotwire, you need to have slightly different approach, how the backend needs to communicate to frontend, or how to divide responsibilities between backend and the frontend. But it's nice, so give it a try. If you want, there are some links that describe this solution and the solutions that are similar to that. Also, if you want to look at the repository, there is a link. Oh, okay. Okay. So now is thank you. Thank you.
If there are any questions, I assume you're available now to have a chat.
Brilliant.
Maybe you can come here and then talk to Michał if there are any questions. And we continue with the next talk at 2:30, and I think we're going to learn about anonymous databases. Okay, thank you. We do the Q&A just over here. So Micha will stay here, and then and there's a speaker gift, of course.